Hi, just sharing on our community post that we're going live. So apologies, it always takes a few minutes to show up. Oh, it's a beautiful day here. I hope it's a beautiful day where you are. We are first just going to shift some energies before we start reading, as we have been doing our sounding while watching Farmer for Fun, land in Portugal, just some beautiful land up in north in the central Portugal, in the mountains, where you can have goats. They actually give you goats to clear the bushland and then take them back on the government project if you've got over 10 acres or 10 hectares, 10 acres I think it is. So this is just one of our homegrown, homemade rosemary smudge bundles. And we've brought in, we had some selenite wands, just bought in our shungite. Today, Sunday, is the third eye chakra. So we've got our third eye chakra crystal. And we've got our Reiki symbols here as well for long distance healing and mastery of Reiki. 2 tiger's eye wands. And then we've got 3 lovely angels. Green aventurine, I think it is, honey calcite, and snow white obsidian. Snowflake obsidian. I think that's it, yeah. So that's better. We're just doing that because, hi Zendaya, before coming on, we did just go into deep emotions. So we just wanted to clear the energies. We were doing our breathing and our body work and our shaking. So we're just going to pull an Alice in Wonderland oracle for this as well. And then we'll read the last 4 chapters of the book. So we're not going to look at it, but there it is. We may look at the spectrum of energies and an Alice in Wonderland tarot card. Yeah, so our littles are around. Everything we do on YouTube is to heal and to manifest. So we would like to buy land, and Portugal seems like a good area to buy land in. One reason being we love Portugal. There's many reasons actually. But for some of us, to actually get us to manifest and to meditate has been Bitcoin. So when we're going through the chaos, what our conscious mind wouldn't normally do, some of us bought Bitcoin on a credit card years ago. So we're hoping that we'll be able to one day use that to buy some land in Portugal, because they have 0% tax on long-term capital gains. Okay, so let's choose 3 tarot and continue on with these beautiful readings. So we are going to do the spectrum of energies for tarot. On the top of the pack, the conscious, the aware, seeing, we've got the 3 of swords. So that's wonderful because we have just been talking about the emotions and the healing, because we aren't able to manifest what we want in life. If what we're wanting to manifest is on the energetic pathways that is congested because of early childhood trauma. And we have the 10 of hedgehogs, the 10 of pentacles again. So that is a beautiful spectrum of energies to be dancing within, because 10 of pentacles is about manifestation in a tangible reality, the physical, the seeing, the wealth, the money. So who knows, maybe all of this is going to happen. This is the bottom of the pack, the unseen, the unaware, and it is number 9, curiouser and curiouser, discovery, inquiry, weirdness and curiosity. And that is all round us, because what we do isn't really what people want. They don't like this multifaceted, integrated, intermingled everything. Otherwise the people that have come on would have stayed, because we're meant to be reading Alice in Wonderland, so therefore they want Alice in Wonderland read. And 40, keeping up, because they can't keep up with us in the multidimensionality of things, because most people haven't accessed their multidimensional being. Immense effort, because it does take immense effort to do so. It takes immense courage as well, and immense self-compassion and waking up and discovering all these different aspects to oneself, which one generally doesn't like, because one doesn't like change. But due to our lifestyle, we're opposite to the majority in lots of ways, but most people are brought up in comfort. We were brought up in discomfort. So for us, it's about navigating our way to comfort while not getting sucked into comfort portal. And for others, it's about understanding that it's not about always what we like, and it's about embracing what we don't like and embracing discomfort too, to be able to expand one's boundaries. Whereas with us and our Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, most people are like rigid and tight in their muscles. So it's about do what you do and then go a bit further. Whereas for us, it's like do what you do and then come a bit back. Otherwise, we break our boundaries. Immense effort. And what's the other word? Advance, and it's 40. So those are the spectrum of energies on there. We'll read the cards at the end, and then we will just do a bit of centering. We're just going to put one hand on our heart and one hand on our lower back. Yesterday was the external root chakra of Saturday and the internal solar plexus chakra of the Red Skywalker. And it was the tone 5 overtone. That's on the Mayan galactic calendar. And today we move from the external, the connecting between the internal and the external of the collective, into the internal root chakra with White Wizard. And the external connecting between the external body and the external collective is Indigo Violet, the 6th third eye chakra. Okay, so let's go on to Alice. And that's not the way to do it. We need to share our screen first, don't we? So here we go, just showing our screen. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And we're just going to check, bring it up on our phone to make sure. There we go. Wonderful. Okay, so let's finish reading to the end of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. We ended on chapter 8 yesterday, so we're starting on chapter 9 today through to the end, chapter 12. Have we gone past it? I think we have. I think chapter 9 is... There we go. Wonderful. Chapter 9, The Mock Turtle's Story. You cannot think how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing, said the Duchess, as she tucked her arm affectionately into Alice's, and they walked off together. Alice was very glad to find her in such a pleasant temper, and thought to herself that perhaps it was only the pepper that had made her so savage when they met in the kitchen. When I'm Duchess, she said to herself, not in a very hopeful tone though, I won't have any pepper in my kitchen at all. Soup does very well without. Maybe it's always pepper that makes people hot-tempered, she went on, very much pleased at having found out a new kind of rule, and vinegar that makes them sour, and chamomile that makes them bitter, and barley sugar and such things that make children sweet-tempered. I only wish people knew that, then they wouldn't be so stingy about it, you know. She had quite forgotten the Duchess by this time, and was a little startled when she heard her voice close to her ear. You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I cannot tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall remember it in a bit. Perhaps it hasn't one, Alice ventured to remark. Tut, tut, child, said the Duchess. Everything's got a moral, if only you can find it. And she squeezed herself up close to Alice's side as she spoke. Alice did not much like her keeping so close to her. First, because the Duchess was very ugly, and secondly, because she was exactly the right height to rest her chin on Alice's shoulder, and it was an uncomfortably sharp chin. However, she did not like to be rude, so she bore it as well as she could. The game's going on rather better now, she said, by way of keeping up with the conversation a little. "'Tis so," said the Duchess, "and the moral of that is, oh, 'tis love that makes the world go round." Somebody said, Alice whispered, that it's done by everybody minding their own business. "Ah, well, it means much the same thing," said the Duchess, digging her sharp little chin into Alice's shoulder as she added, "and the moral of that is, take care of the sense and the sounds will take care of themselves." How fond she is of finding morals in things, Alice thought to herself. We're just going to do a little test that we can hear the volume. "I dare say you're wondering why I don't put my arm round your waist," the Duchess said after a pause. "The reason is that I'm doubtful about the temper of your flamingo. Shall I try the experiment?" "He might bite," Alice cautiously replied, not feeling at all anxious to have the experiment tried. "Very true," said the Duchess. "Flamingos and mustard both bite, and the moral of that is, birds of a feather flock together." "Only mustard isn't a bird," Alice remarked. "Right, as usual," said the Duchess. "What a clear way you have of putting things." "It's a mineral, I think," said Alice. "Of course it is," said the Duchess, who seemed ready to agree to everything that Alice said. "There's a large mustard mine near here, and the moral of that is, the more there is of mine, the less there is of yours." "Oh, I know," exclaimed Alice, who had not attended to this last remark. "It's a vegetable. It doesn't look like one, but it is." "I quite agree with you," said the Duchess, "and the moral of that is, be what you would seem to be, or if you'd like it put more simply, never imagine yourself not to be otherwise than what it might appear to others, that what you were or might have been was not otherwise than what you had been would have appeared to them to be otherwise." "I think I should understand that better," Alice said very politely, "if I had written it down, but I can't quite follow it as you say it." "That's nothing to what I could say if I chose," the Duchess replied in a pleased tone. "Pray don't trouble yourself to say it any longer than that," said Alice. "Oh, don't talk about trouble," said the Duchess. "I make you a present of everything I've said as yet." "A cheap sort of present," thought Alice. "I'm glad people don't give birthday presents like that," but she did not venture to say it out loud. "Thinking again?" the Duchess asked with another dig of her sharp little chin. "I've a right to think," Alice said sharply, for she was beginning to feel a little worried. "Just about as much right," said the Duchess, "as pigs have to fly. And the—" But here, to Alice's great surprise, the Duchess's voice died away, even in the middle of her favourite word, moral. And the arm that was linked into hers began to tremble. Alice looked up, and there stood the Queen in front of them, with her arms folded, frowning like a thunderstorm. "A fine day, your Majesty," the Duchess began in a low, weak voice. "Now I give you fair warning," shouted the Queen, stamping on the ground as she spoke. "Either you or your head must be off, and that in about half no time. Take your choice." The Duchess took her choice and was gone in a moment. "Let's get on with the game," the Queen said to Alice, and Alice was too much frightened to say a word, but slowly followed her back to the croquet ground. The other guests had taken advantage of the Queen's absence and were resting in the shade. However, the moment they saw her, they hurried back to the game, the Queen merely remarking that a moment's delay would cost them their lives. All the time they were playing the Queen never left off quarrelling with the other players and shouting, "Off with his head!" or "Off with her head!" Those whom she sentenced were taken into custody by the soldiers, who of course had to leave off being archers to do this. So that by the end of half an hour or so, there were no archers left, and all the players except the king, the queen, and Alice were in custody and under sentence of execution. Then the queen left off, quite out of breath, and said to Alice, "Have you seen the mock turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "I don't even know what a mock turtle is." "It's the thing mock turtle soup is made from," said the queen. "I never saw one or heard of one," said Alice. "Come on, then," said the queen, "and he shall tell you his history." As they walked off together, Alice heard the king say in a low voice to the company generally, "You are all pardoned. Come, that's a good thing," she said to herself, for she had felt quite unhappy at the number of executions the queen had ordered. They very soon came upon a griffin lying fast asleep in the sun. If you don't know what a griffin is, look at the picture. "Up, lazy thing," said the queen, "and take this young lady to see the mock turtle, and to hear his history. I must go back and see after some executions I have ordered." And she walked off, leaving Alice alone with the griffin. Alice did not quite like the look of the creature, but on the whole she thought it would be quite as safe to stay with it as to go after that savage queen. So she waited. The griffin sat up and rubbed its eyes, and then it watched the queen till she was out of sight. Then it chuckled. "What fun!" said the griffin, half to itself, half to Alice. "What is the fun?" said Alice. "Why, she," said the griffin. "It's all her fancy, that. They never executes nobody, you know. Come on." "Everybody says 'come on' here," thought Alice, as she went slowly after it. "I never was so ordered about before in all my life." They had not gone far before they saw the mock turtle in the distance, sitting sad and lonely on a little ledge of rock, and as they came nearer, Alice could hear him sighing as if his heart would break. She pitied him deeply. "What is his sorrow?" she asked the griffin, and the griffin answered very nearly in the same words as before. "It's all his fancy, that he hasn't got no sorrow, you know. Come on." So they went up to the mock turtle, who looked at them with large eyes full of tears, but saw nothing. "This here young lady," said the griffin, "she wants to know for your history, she do." "I tell it," said the mock turtle in a deep hollow tone. "Sit down, both of you, and don't speak a word till I've finished." So they sat down, and nobody spoke for some minutes. Alice thought to herself, "I don't see how he can ever finish if he doesn't begin," but she waited patiently. "Once," said the mock turtle at last with a deep sigh, "I was a real turtle." These words were followed by a very long silence, broken only by an occasional exclamation of "Here, Jigra!" from the griffin, and the constant heavy sobbing of the mock turtle. Alice was very nearly getting up and saying, "Thank you, sir, for your interesting story," but she could not help thinking there must be more to come, so she sat still and said nothing. "When we were little," the mock turtle went on at last, more calmly, though still sobbing a little now and then, "we went to school in the sea. The master was an old turtle. We used to call him Tortoise." "Why did you call him Tortoise if he wasn't one?" Alice asked. "We called him Tortoise because he taught us," said the mock turtle angrily. "Really, you are very dull." You ought to be ashamed of yourself for asking such a simple question," added the griffin. And then they both sat silent and looked at poor Alice, who felt ready to sink into the earth. At last the griffin said to the mock turtle, Drive on, old fellow, don't be all day about it." And he went on in these words: "Yes, we went to school in the sea, though you mayn't believe it." "I never said I didn't," interrupted Alice. "You did," said the mock turtle. "Hold your tongue," added the griffin, before Alice could speak again. The mock turtle went on. "We had The best of educations. In fact, we went to school every day. I've been to a day school too, said Alice. You needn't be so proud as all that. With extras? Asked the Mock Turtle a little anxiously. Yes, said Alice, we learnt French and music. And washing? Said the Mock Turtle. Certainly not, said Alice indignantly. Ah, then yours wasn't a really good school, said the Mock Turtle in a tone of great relief. No, at ours they had, at the end of the bill, French, music, and washing extra. You couldn't have wanted it much, said Alice, living at the bottom of the sea. I couldn't afford to learn it, said the Mock Turtle with a sigh. I only took the regular course. What was that? Inquired Alice. Reeling and rifing, of course, to begin with, the Mock Turtle replied, and then the different branches of arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision. I never heard of uglification, Alice ventured to say. What is it? The Griffin lifted up both its paws in surprise. Never heard of uglifying? It exclaimed. You know what to beautify is, I suppose. Yes, said Alice doubtfully. It means to make anything prettier. Well then, the Griffin went on, if you don't know what to uglify is, you are a simpleton. Alice did not feel encouraged to ask any more questions about it, so she turned to the Mock Turtle and said, What else had you to learn? Well, there was mystery, the Mock Turtle replied, counting off the subjects on his flappers. Mystery, ancient and modern, with seography. Then drawling. The drawling master was an old conger eel that used to come once a week. He taught us drawing, sketching, and fainting in coils. What was that like? Said Alice. Well, I cannot show it to you myself, the Mock Turtle said. I'm too stiff, and the Griffin never learnt it. Hadn't time, said the Griffin. I went to the classical master, though. He was an old crab, he was. I never went to him, the Mock Turtle said with a sigh. He taught laughing and grief, they used to say. So he did, said the Griffin, sighing in his turn, and both creatures hid their faces in their paws. And how many hours a day did you do lessons? Said Alice, in a hurry to change the subject. 10 hours the first day, said the Mock Turtle, 9 the next, and so on. What a curious plan, exclaimed Alice. That's the reason they're called lessons, the Griffin remarked, because they lessen from day to day. This was quite a new idea to Alice, and she thought it over a little before she made her next remark. Then the 11th day must have been a holiday. Of course it was, said the Mock Turtle. And how did you manage on the 12th? Alice went on eagerly. That's enough about lessons, the Griffin interrupted in a very decided tone. Tell us something about the games now. Chapter 10. The Lobster Quadrille. The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and drew back of one flapper across his eyes. He looked at Alice and tried to speak, but for a minute or two sobs choked his voice. Same as if he had a bone in his throat, said the Griffin, and it set to work shaking him and punching him in the back. At last the Mock Turtle recovered his voice, and with tears running down his cheeks, he went on again. You may not have lived much under the sea. I haven't, said Alice, and perhaps you were never even introduced to a lobster. Alice began to say, I once tasted, but checked herself hastily and said, No, never. So you can have no idea what a delightful thing a lobster quadrille is. No, indeed, said Alice. What sort of a dance is it? Why, said the Griffin, you first form into a line along the seashore. 2 lines, cried the Mock Turtle. Seals, turtles, salmon, and so on. Then, when you've cleared all the jellyfish out of the way, that generally takes some time, interrupted the Griffin. You advance twice, each with a lobster as a partner, cried the Griffin. Of course, the Mock Turtle said. Advance twice, set to partners. Change lobsters and retire in same order, continued the Griffin. Then, you know, the Mock Turtle went on, you throw the "The lobsters!" shouted the Gryphon, with a bound into the air. "As far out to sea as you can." "Swim after them!" screamed the Gryphon. "Turn a somersault in the sea!" cried the Mock Turtle, capering wildly about. "Change lobsters again!" yelled the Gryphon at the top of its voice. "Back to land again, and that's all the first figure," said the Mock Turtle, suddenly dropping his voice, and the two creatures, who had been jumping about like mad things all this time, sat down again very sadly and quietly and looked at Alice. "It must be a very pretty dance," said Alice timidly. "Would you like to see a little of it?" said the Mock Turtle. "Very much indeed," said Alice. "Come, let's try the first figure," said the Mock Turtle to the Gryphon. "We can do it without lobsters, you know. Rich shall sing." "Oh, you sing," said the Gryphon. "I've forgotten the words." So they began solemnly dancing round and round Alice, every now and then treading on her toes when they passed too close, and waving their forepaws to mark the time, while the Mock Turtle sang this very slowly and sadly. "Will you walk a little faster?" said a whiting to a snail. "There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They are waiting on the shingle. Will you come and join the dance? Will you? Won't you? Will you? Won't you? Will you join the dance? Will you? Won't you? Will you? Won't you? Won't you join the dance? You can really have no notion how delightful it will be when they take us up and throw us with the lobsters out to sea." But the snail replied, too far, and gave a look askance. Said he thanked the whiting kindly, but he would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not, would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not join the dance. "What matters it how far we go?" his scaly friend replied. "There is another shore, you know, upon the other side. The further off from England, the nearer it is to France. Then turn not pale, beloved snail, but come and join the dance. Will you? Won't you? Will you? Won't you? Will you join the dance? Will you? Won't you? Will you? Won't you? Won't you join the dance?" "Thank you. It's a very interesting dance to watch," said Alice, feeling very glad that it was over at last. "And I do so like that curious song about the whiting." "Oh, as to the whiting," said the Mock Turtle, you've seen them, of course." "Yes," said Alice, "I've often seen them at She checked herself hastily. "I don't know where Din may be," said the Mock Turtle, "but if you've seen them so often, of course you know what they're like." "I believe so," Alice replied, thoughtfully. "They have their tails in their mouths, and they're all covered in crumbs." "You're wrong about the crumbs," said the Mock Turtle. "Crumbs would all wash off in the sea, but they have their tails in their mouths, and the reason is—" Here the Mock Turtle yawned and shut his eyes. "Tell her about the reason and all that," he said to the Gryphon. "The reason is," said the Gryphon, "that they would go with the lobsters to the dance, so they got thrown out to sea, so they had to fall a long way, so they got their tails fast in their mouths, so they couldn't get them out again. That's all." "Thank you," said Alice. "It's very interesting. I never knew so much about whiting before." "I can tell you more than that, if you like," said the Gryphon. "Do you know why it's called a whiting?" "I never thought about it," said Alice. "What? Why?" "It does the boots and shoes," the Gryphon replied very solemnly. Alice was thoroughly puzzled. "Does the boots and shoes?" she repeated in a wondering tone. "Why, what are your shoes done with?" said the Gryphon. "I mean, what makes them so shiny?" Alice looked down at them and considered a little before she gave her answer. They're done with blacking, I believe. Boots and shoes under the sea, the Gryphon went on in a deep voice, are done with whiting. Now you know. And what are they made of? Alice asked in a tone of great curiosity. Soles and eels, of course, the Gryphon replied, rather impatiently. Any shrimp could have told you that. If I'd been the whiting, said Alice, whose thoughts were still running on the song, I'd have said to the porpoise, keep back, please, we don't want you with us. They were obliged to have him with them, the Mock Turtle said. No wise fish would go anywhere without a porpoise. Wouldn't it, really? Said Alice in a tone of great surprise. Of course not, said the Mock Turtle. Why, if a fish came to me and told me he was going on a journey, I should say, with what porpoise? Don't you mean purpose? Said Alice. I mean what I say, the Mock Turtle replied in an offended tone, and the Gryphon added, Come, let's hear some of your adventures. I could tell you my adventures beginning from this morning. I could tell you my adventures beginning from this morning, said Alice a little timidly, but it's no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. Explain all that, said the Mock Turtle. No, no, the adventures first, said the Gryphon in an impatient tone. Explanations take such a dreadful time. So Alice began telling them her adventures from the time when she first saw the White Rabbit. She was a little nervous about it. Just at first, the two creatures got so close to her, one on each side, and opened their eyes and mouths so very wide, but she gained courage as she went on. Her listeners were perfectly quiet till she got to the part about her repeating, You are old Father William, to the caterpillar, and the words all coming out different. And then the Mock Turtle drew a long breath and said, That's very curious. It's all about as curious as it can be, said the Gryphon. It all came different, the Mock Turtle repeated thoughtfully. I should like to hear her try and repeat something now. Tell her to begin. He looked at the Gryphon as if he thought it had some kind of authority over Alice. Stand up and repeat. 'Tis the voice of the sluggard, said the Gryphon. How the creatures order one about and make one repeat lessons, thought Alice. I might just as well be at school at once. However, she got up and began to repeat it. But her head was so full of the lobster quadrille that she hardly knew what she was saying, and the words came out very queer indeed. 'Tis the voice of the lobster. I heard him declare, You have baked me too brown, I must sugar my hair. As a duck with its eyelids, so he with his nose trims his bout and his buttons and turns out his toes. When the sands are all dry, he is gay as a lark, and will talk in contemptuous tones of the shark. But when the tide rises and sharks are around, his voice has a timid and tremulous sound. That's different from what I used to say when I was a child, said the Gryphon. Well, I never heard it before, said the Mock Turtle, but it sounds uncommon nonsense. Alice said nothing. She had sat down with her face in her hands, wondering if anything would ever happen in a natural way again. I should like to have it explained, said the Mock Turtle. She can't explain it, said the Gryphon hastily. Go on with the next verse. But about his toes, the Mock Turtle persisted. How could he turn them out with his nose? You know. It's the first position in dancing, Alice said, but she was dreadfully puzzled by the whole thing and longed to change the subject. Go on with the next verse, the Gryphon repeated. It begins, I passed by his garden. Alice did not dare to disobey, though she felt sure it would all come out wrong, and she went on in a trembling voice. I passed by his garden and marked with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pie crust and gravy and meat, while the owl had the dish as its share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl, as a boon, was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon, while the panther received knife and fork with a growl, and concluded the banquet by What is the use of repeating all that stuff? The Mock Turtle interrupted, if you don't explain it as you go on. It's by far the most confusing thing I've ever heard. Yes, I think you'd better leave off, said the Gryphon, and Alice was only too glad to do so. Shall we try another figure of the lobster quadrille? The Gryphon went on. Or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing you another song? Oh, a song, please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind, Alice replied, so eagerly that the Gryphon said in a rather offended tone, no accounting for tastes. Sing her turtle soup, will you, old fellow? The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began in a voice choked with sobs to sing this. Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen. Who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, who cares for fish, game or any other dish? Who would not give all else for two? Pennyworth only of beautiful soup, pennyworth only of beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup, soup of the evening. Beautiful, beautiful soup. Chorus again, cried the Gryphon, and the Mock Turtle had just begun to repeat it when a cry of "The trail's beginning" was heard in the distance. Come on, cried the Gryphon, and taking Alice by the hand, it hurried off without waiting for the end of the song. What trial is it? Alice panted as she ran, but the Gryphon only answered, Come on, and ran the faster, while more and more faintly came, carried on the breeze that followed them, the melancholy words. Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Chapter 11. Who Stole the Tarts? The King and Queen of Hearts were seated on their throne when they arrived, with a great crowd assembled about them, all sorts of little birds and beasts, as well as the whole pack of cards. The knave was standing before them, in chains, with a soldier on each side to guard him. And near the king was the white rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand and a scroll of parchment in the other. In the very middle of the court was a table with a large dish of tarts upon it. They looked so good that it made Alice quite hungry to look at them. I wish they'd get the trial done, she thought, and hand round the refreshments. But there seemed to be no chance of this, so she began looking at everything about her to pass away the time. Alice had never been in a court of justice before, but she had read about them in books, and she was quite pleased to find that she knew the name of nearly everything there. That's the judge, she said to herself, because of his great wig. The judge, by the way, was the king, and as he wore his crown over the wig, look at the frontispiece if you want to see how he did it. He did not look at all comfortable, and it was certainly not becoming. And that's the jury box, thought Alice. And those 12 creatures, she was obliged to say creatures, you see, because some of them were animals and some were birds. I suppose they are the jurors. She said this last word 2 or 3 times over to herself, being rather proud of it, for she thought, and rightly too, that very few little girls of her age knew the meaning of it all. However, jurymen would have done just as well. 12 jurors were all writing very busily on slates. What are they doing? Alice whispered to the Gryphon. They can't have anything to put down yet, before the trial's begun. They're putting down their names, the Gryphon whispered in reply, for fear they should forget them before the end of the trial. Stupid things, Alice began in a loud, indignant voice, but she stopped herself hastily, for the White Rabbit cried out, "Silence in the court!" And the king put on his spectacles and looked anxiously round to make out who was talking. Alice could see, as well as if she were looking over their shoulders, at that all the jurors were writing down stupid things on their slates. And she could even make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid, and that he had to ask his neighbour to tell him. A nice muddle their slates will be in before the trial's over, thought Alice. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Alice could not stand, and she went round the court and got behind him, and very soon found an opportunity of taking it away. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was Bill the lizard, could not make out at all what had become of it. So after hunting all about for it, he was obliged to write with one finger for the rest of the day, and this was of very little use, as it left no mark on the slate. "Herald, read the accusation," said the king. On this, the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet, and then unrolled the parchment scroll and read as follows. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer's day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away." "Consider your verdict," the king said to the jury. "Not yet, not yet," the rabbit hastily interrupted. "There's a great deal to come before that." "Call the first witness," said the king, and the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and called out, "First witness." The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. "I beg pardon, your Majesty," he began, "for bringing these in, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for." "You ought to have finished," said the king. "When did you begin?" The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who had followed him into the court, arm in arm with the Dormouse. "14th of March, I think it was," he said. "15th," said the March Hare. "16th," said the Dormouse. "Write that down," the king said to the jury, and the jury eagerly wrote down all 3 dates on their slates and then added them up and reduced the answer to shillings and pence. "Take off your hat," the king said to the Hatter. "It isn't mine," said the Hatter. "Stolen!" the king exclaimed, turning to the jury, who instantly made a memorandum of the fact. "I keep them to sell," the Hatter added as an exclamation. "I've none of my own. I'm a Hatter." Here the Queen put on her spectacles and began staring hard at the Hatter, who turned pale and fidgeted. "Give your evidence," said the king, "and don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed on the spot." This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting from one foot to the other, looking uneasily at the Queen, and in his confusion he bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just at this moment, Alice felt a very curious sensation, which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again, and she thought at first she would get up and leave the court. But on second thoughts, she decided to remain where she was as long as there was room for her. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "I can't help it," said Alice very meekly. "I'm growing." "You've no right to grow here," said the Dormouse. "Don't talk nonsense," said Alice more boldly. "You know you're growing too." "Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace," said the Dormouse, "not in that ridiculous fashion," and he got up very sulkily and crossed over to the other side of the court. All this time the Queen had never left off staring at the Hatter, and just as the Dormouse crossed the court, she said to one of the officers of the court, "Bring me the list of the singers in the last concert." On which the wretched Hatter trembled so that he shook off both his shoes. "Give your evidence," the king repeated angrily, "or I'll have you executed whether you're nervous or not." I'm a poor man, your majesty, the Hatter began in a trembling voice, and I hadn't begun my tea, not above a week or so, and with the bread and butter getting so thin and the twinkling of the tea. The twinkling of what? Said the king. It began with the tea, the Hatter replied. Of course, twinkling begins with a tea, said the king sharply. Do you take me for a dunce? Go on. I'm a poor man, the Hatter went on, and most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said, I didn't. The March Hare interrupted in a great hurry. You did, said the Hatter. I deny it, said the March Hare. He denies it, said the king. Leave out that part. Well, at any rate, the Dormouse said. The Hatter went on, looking anxiously round to see if he would deny it too. But the Dormouse denied nothing, being fast asleep. After that, continued the Hatter, I cut some more bread and butter. But what did the Dormouse say? One of the jury asked. Then I can't remember, said the Hatter. You must remember, remarked the king, or I'll have you executed. The miserable Hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter and went down on one knee. I'm a poor man, your majesty, he began. You're a very poor speaker, said the king. Here one of the guinea pigs cheered and was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, as that is rather a hard word. I will just explain to you how it was done. They had a large canvas bag which tied up at the mouth with strings. Into this they slipped the guinea pig, head first, and then sat upon it. I'm glad I've seen that done, thought Alice. I've so often read it in the newspapers. At the end of trials, there was some attempt at applause, which was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, and I never understood what it meant till now. If that's all you know about, you may stand down, continued the king. I can't go no lower, said the Hatter. I'm on the floor as it is. Then you may sit down, the king replied. Here the other guinea pig cheered and was suppressed. Come, that finishes the guinea pigs, thought Alice. Now we shall get on better. I'd rather finish my tea, said the Hatter with an anxious look at the Queen, who was reading the list of singers. You may go, said the king, and the Hatter hurriedly left the court without even waiting to put his shoes on. And just take his head off outside, the Queen added to one of the officers. But the Hatter was out of sight before the officer could get to the door. Call the next witness, said the king. The next witness was the Duchess's cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand, and Alice guessed who it was even before she got into the court, by the way the people near the door began sneezing all at once. Give your evidence, said the king. Shan't, said the cook. The king looked anxiously at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice, Your Majesty must cross-examine this witness. Well, if I must, I must, the king said with a melancholy air, and after folding his arms and frowning at the cook till his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice, What are tarts made of? Pepper, mostly, said the cook. Treacle, said a sleepy voice behind her. Collar that dormouse, the queen shrieked out. Behead that dormouse, turn that dormouse out of court, suppress him, pinch him, off with his whiskers. For some minutes the whole court was in confusion, getting the dormouse turned out, and by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared. Never mind, said the king, with an air of great relief. Call the next witness. And he added in an undertone to the Queen, Really, my dear, you must cross-examine the next witness. It quite makes my forehead ache. Alice watched the White Rabbit as he fumbled over the list, feeling very curious to see what the next witness would be like, for they haven't got much evidence yet. She said to herself, imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out at the top of its shrill little voice the name, Alice! Chapter 12. Alice's Evidence. Here, cried Alice, quite forgetting in the flurry of the moment how large she had grown. in the last few minutes, and she jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the jury box with the edge of her skirt, upsetting all the jurymen on to the heads of the crowd below. And there they lay, sprawling about behind her, very much of a globe of golden, reminding her very much of a globe of goldfish she had accidentally upset the week before. "Oh, I beg your pardon," she exclaimed in a tone of great dismay, and began picking them up again as quickly as she could, for the accident of the goldfish kept running in her head, and she had a vague sort of idea that they must be collected at once and put back into the jury box, or they would die. "The trial cannot proceed," said the king in a very grave voice, "until all the jurymen are back in their proper places, all," he repeated with great emphasis, looking hard at Alice as he said so. Alice looked at the jury box and saw that in her haste she had put the lizard in head downwards, and the poor little thing was waving its tail about in a melancholy way, being quite unable to move. She soon got it out again and put it right. "Not that it signifies much," she said to herself. "I should think it would be quite as much use in the trial one way up as the other." As soon as the jury had a little recovered from the shock of being upset, and their slates and pencils had been found and handed back to them, they set to work very diligently to write out a history of the accident, all except the lizard, who seemed too much overcome to do anything but sit with its mouth open, gazing up into the roof of the court. "What do you know about the business?" the king said to Alice. "Nothing," said Alice. "Nothing whatever?" persisted the king. "Nothing whatever," said Alice. "That's very important," the king said, turning to the jury. They were just beginning to write this down on the slates when the White Rabbit interrupted. "Unimportant, your majesty means, of course," he said in a very respectful tone, but frowning and making faces at him as he spoke. "Unimportant, of course, I meant," the king hastily said, and went on to himself in an undertone. "Important, underimportant, unimportant, important," as if he were trying which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote it down, important, and some unimportant. Alice could see this, as she was near enough to look over their slates. But it doesn't matter a bit, she thought to herself. At this moment, the king, who had been for some time busily writing in his notebook, called out, "Silence!" and read out from his book, "Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high to leave the court." Everybody looked at Alice. "I'm not a mile high," said Alice. "You are," said the king. "Nearly 2 miles high," added the queen. "Well, I shan't go, at any rate," said Alice. "Besides, that's not a regular rule. You invented it just now." "It's the oldest rule in the book," said the king. "Then it ought to be number 1, said Alice. The king turned pale and shut his notebook hastily. "Consider your verdict," he said to the jury in a low, trembling voice. "There's more evidence to come yet, please, your majesty," said the White Rabbit, jumping up in a great hurry. "This paper has just been picked up." "What's in it?" said the queen. "I haven't opened it yet," said the White Rabbit, "but it seems to be a letter written by the prisoner to somebody." "It must have been that," said the king, "unless it was written to nobody, which isn't usual, you know." "Who is it directed to?" said one of the jurymen. "It isn't directed at all," said the White Rabbit. "In fact, there's nothing written on the outside." He unfolded the paper as he spoke and added, "It isn't a letter after all, it's a set of verses." "Are they in the prisoner's handwriting?" asked another of the jurymen. "No, they're not," said the White Rabbit, "and that's the queerest thing about it." The jury all looked puzzled. "He must have imitated somebody else's hand," said the "He must have imitated somebody else's hand," said the king. The jury all brightened up again. "Please, your majesty," said the knave, "I didn't write it, and they can't prove that I did. There's no name signed at the end." "If you didn't sign it," said the king, "that only makes the matter worse. You must have meant some mischief, or else you'd have signed your name like an honest man." There was a general clapping of hands at this. It was the first really clever thing the king had said that day. "That proves his guilt, of course," said the Queen. "So off with—" "It doesn't prove anything of the sort," said Alice. "Why, you don't even know what they're about." "Read them," said the King. The White Rabbit put on his spectacles. "Where shall I begin, please, your Majesty?" he asked. "Begin at the beginning," the King said very gravely, "and go on till you come to the end. Then stop." There was dead silence in the court whilst the White Rabbit read out these verses. "They told me you had been to her and mentioned me to him. She gave me a good character, but said I could not swim. He sent them word I had not gone, we know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her one, they gave him two, you gave us three or more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should dance to be involved in this affair, he trusts to you to set them free exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, an obstacle that came between him and ourselves and it. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept from all the rest between yourself and me." "That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard yet," said the King, rubbing his hands. "So now let the jury—" "If any one of them can explain it," said Alice. She had grown so large in the last few minutes that she wasn't a bit afraid of interrupting him. "I'll give him sixpence. I don't believe there's an atom of meaning in it." The jury all wrote down on their slides, "She doesn't believe there's an atom of meaning in it," but none of them attempted to explain the paper. "If there's no meaning in it," said the King, "that saves a world of trouble, you know, as we needn't try to find any. And yet, I don't know," he went on, spreading out the verses on his knee and looking at them with one eye, "I seem to see some meaning in them after all. Said I could not swim. You can't swim, can you?" he added, turning to the Knave. The Knave shook his head sadly. "Do I look like it?" he said, which he certainly did not, being made entirely of cardboard. "All right, so far," said the King, and he went on muttering over the verses to himself. "We know it to be true. That's the jury, of course. If she should push the matter on, that must be the Queen. What would become of you? What indeed? I gave her one, they gave him two. Why, that must be what he did with the tarts, you know." "But it goes on, they'll all return from him to you," said Alice. "Why, there they are," said the King triumphantly, pointing to the tarts on the table. "Nothing can be clearer than that. Then again, before she had this fit, you never had fits, my dear, I think," he said to the Queen. "Never," said the Queen, furiously throwing in an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke. The unfortunate little Bill had left off writing on his slate with one finger, as he found it made no mark, but he now hastily began again, using the ink that was trickling down his face as long as it lasted. "Then the words don't fit you," said the King, looking round the court with a smile. There was a dead silence. "It's a pun," the King added in an angry tone, and everybody laughed. "Let the jury consider their verdict," the King said, for about the 20th time that day. "No, no," said the Queen. "Sentence first, verdict afterwards." "Stuff and nonsense," said Alice loudly. "The idea of having the sentence first—" "Hold your tongue," said the Queen, turning purple. "I won't," said Alice. "Off with her head," the Queen shouted at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. "Who cares for you?" said Alice. She had grown to her full size by this time. "You're nothing but a pack of cards." At this time the whole pack rose up into the air and came flying down upon her. She gave a little scream, half of fright and half of anger, and tried to beat them off, and found herself lying on the bank with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees upon her face. "Wake up, Alice dear," said her sister. "Why, what a long sleep you've had." Oh, I've had such a curious dream, said Alice, and she told her sister as well as she could remember them. All these strange adventures of hers that you have just been reading about. And when she had finished, her sister kissed her and said, "It was a curious dream, dear, certainly, but now run into your tea. It's getting late." So Alice got up and ran off, thinking while she ran, as well as she might, what a wonderful dream it had been. But her sister sat still just as she left her, leaning her head on her hand, watching the setting sun, and thinking of little Alice and all her wonderful adventures, till she too began dreaming after a fashion, and this was her dream. First she dreamt about little Alice herself. Once again the tiny hands were clasped upon her knee, and the bright eager eyes were looking up into hers. She could hear the very tones of her voice and see that queer little toss of her head to keep back the wandering hair that would always get into her eyes. And still, as she listened, or seemed to listen, the whole place around her became alive with the strange creatures of her little sister's dream. The long grass rustled at her feet as the white rabbit hurried by. The frightened mouse splashed his way through the neighbouring pool. She could hear the rattle of the teacups as the March Hare and his friends shared their never-ending meal, and the shrill voice of the Queen ordering off her unfortunate guests to execution. Once more the pig baby was sneezing on the Duchess's knee, while plates and dishes crashed around it. Once more the shriek of the griffin, the squeaking of the lizard's slate pencil, and the choking of the suppressed guinea pigs filled the air, mixed up with the distant sob of the miserable mock turtle. So she sat on with closed eyes and half believed herself in Wonderland, though she knew she had but to open them again, and all would change to dull reality. The grass would be only rustling in the wind, and the pool rippling to the waving of the reeds. The rattling teacups would change to tinkling sheep bells, and the Queen's shrill cries to the voice of the shepherd boy. And the sneeze of the baby, the shriek of the griffin, and all the other queer noises would change, she knew, to the confused clamour of the busy farmyard, while the lowing of the cattle in the distance would take the place of the mock turtle's heavy sobs. Lastly, she pictured herself how this same little sister of hers would, in the aftertime, be herself a grown up woman, and how she would keep, through all her riper years, the simple and loving heart of her childhood, and how she would gather about her other little children and make their eyes bright and eager with many a strange tale, perhaps even with the dream of Wonderland of long ago, and how she would feel with all their simple sorrows and find a pleasure in all their simple joys, remembering her own child life and the happy summer days. The end. And we will at some point read through the looking glass and what Alice found there. But we're going to go back and read the introduction. We're just going to change our seated position. Okay. And just put in our little blocks. Oh, that one's over there. Maybe it'll be okay. Okay. So what is that at the beginning? So this is the rabbit hole went straight on like a tunnel for some way and then dipped suddenly down, so suddenly that Alice had not a moment to think about stopping herself before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well. So these are quotes. These must be, we're guessing, kind of famous quotes that stand out. So we're going to read a bit about Lewis Carroll. That'll be interesting. Lewis Carroll was born as Charles Ludwig Dodgson on January the 27th, 1832, in Daresbury, Cheshire, England, the eldest son of 11 children raised in a devout English household. He had an inquisitive mind, and his early poems, plays, and paintings display the genius that characterizes his mature works. He seems to have had a happy childhood. Charles was often in charge of the activities of his younger siblings, and he showed a great gift for entertaining and instructing children, one that would persist and deepen throughout his life. Young Charles had a sharp intellect, and tutored by his father was well ahead of the other students when he enrolled in grade school. He became fluent in Latin and had a propensity for complex mathematics that would likewise distinguish him when in 1850 he entered university at Christ Church College of Oxford University. After graduation, he taught mathematics and logic at Christ Church. In 1856, he created the pseudonym Lewis Carroll, versions of his first and middle names in reverse order. He conducted his academic career and published mathematical works as Charles Dodgson, but signed his literary works as Lewis Carroll. Carroll was known for his piety. He was ordained as a deacon in 1861, and he suffered from a stutter and deafness in one ear. A sensitive man with many interests, he was an amateur painter and inventor, and an avid theatregoer and an avid theatre goer who moved in London's artistic circles. A talented art photographer, he made portraits of various luminaries of the day, including Tennyson and the Rossettis. Most frequently, however, he turned his lens upon his favourite subjects and companions, young girls. Carroll's love of purity and guilelessness and his early experience with his many siblings made him prefer the company of children to that of adults. Whatever other impulses may have led Dodgson to seek out the companionship of young girls, these relationships were by all accounts innocent and kindly. Indeed, Dodgson's young friends were inspirational. The games and stories he invented to please them led to the creation of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, among other works of fantasy and high nonsense. Carroll never married, maintained close relationships with his siblings, and led a charitable, productive life, unshaken by the political and social upheavals of the day. His more than 300 published works comprise poetry, mathematics, logic, and his beloved children's stories. Lewis Carroll died in Guildford, England on January the 14th, 1898. R.I.P. There's a timeline here, which we will not read out. But we will read the introduction. But what we're first going to do is have a bathroom break. Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, get that little pad. Oops, wiggle wobble. Okay. Nope. It's definitely much warmer here today than it has been. So let's continue. And read the introduction. We wonder if the introductions are the same. I think they're slightly different that we've noticed already, because we've got the Wordsworth Classics, which has kind of teacher's notes and stuff in. I'm pretty sure the introductions have been a bit different than that, but I don't know if we'll have the energy to read both. We'll see how we're feeling. Introduction. Boredom and nonsense in Wonderland. What do you suppose is the use of a child without any meaning? Page 253. Alice's adventures in Wonderland and through the looking glass, and what Alice found there pursue what lies beyond and down rabbit holes and on reverse sides of mirrors. But mainly their subject is what comes after, and in this sense the books are allegories about what a child can know and come to know. This quest, as in many great works of literature, unwinds against a larger backdrop. What can and what cannot be known at a particular historical moment, a moment that in Lewis Carroll's case preceded both Freud's speculations on the unconscious and Heisenberg's formulation of the uncertainty principle. Yet because the books were written by a teacher of mathematics who was also a reverend, they are also concerned with what can and cannot be taught to a child who has an infinite faith in the goodness and good sense of the world. But Alice's quest for knowledge, her desire to become something, a grown-up, she is not, is inverted. The books are not conventional quest romances in which Alice matures, overcomes obstacles, and eventually gains wisdom. For when Alice arrives in Wonderland, she is already the most reasonable creature there. She is wiser than any lesson books are able to teach her to be. More important, she is eminently more reasonable than her own feelings will allow her to express. What comes after for Alice? Near the end of Through the Looking Glass, the White Queen tells Alice something's going to happen. Quests for mastery are continually frustrated in the Alice books. In comparison with the ever-sane Alice, it is the various Wonderland creatures who appear to be ridiculous, coiners of abstract word games. Yet Carol also frustrates with equal precision Alice's more reasonable human desires. Why, after all, cannot Alice know why the Mad Hatter is mad, or why will Alice never get to 20 in her multiplication tables? In Carol, the logic of mathematical proofs runs counter to the logic of reasonable human desire, and neither logic is easily mastered. To his radical epistemological doubt, Carroll added a healthy dose of skepticism for the conventional children's story, a story that in his day came packaged with a moral aim and treated the child as an innocent or tabula rasa upon which the morals and knowledge of the adult could be tidily imprinted. Alice embodies an idea Freud would later develop at length. What Alice, the child, already knows, the adult has yet to learn. Or, to be more precise, what Alice has not yet forgotten, the adult has yet to remember as something that is by nature unforgettable. In other words, in Alice's childhood fantasy meets the reality of adulthood, which to the child looks as unreal and unreasonable as a Cheshire cat's grin or a queen who yowls off with her head. But even as she calls adult reality unreal, Alice, as the most reasonable creature in her unreasonable dreams, doesn't quite yet realise that the adult sense of reality has already taken up residence in her. The principal dream of most children, the dream within the dream, as it were, is the dream of not dreaming any longer, the dream of growing up. For the adult, the outlook is reversed. The adult's quest is an inverted one, to find those desires again in more reasonable forms. And this involves forgetting the original childhood desires to become an adult, in order to remember them as an adult. The psychoanalyst Adam Phillips notes Freud is not really saying that we are really children, but that the central intensities of childhood cannot be abolished, that our ideals are transformed versions of childhood pleasures. Looking forward is a paradoxical form of looking back. The future is where one retrieves the pleasures, the bodily pleasures of the past. The Alice books manage to show both these quests, that of the child to look forward and of the adult to look back, simultaneously as mirror logics of each other. Like both Freud and the surrealists, Carroll implicitly understood that a child's emotions and desires appear omnipotent and boundless to the child, and thus make the adult's forgetting of them difficult, if not illogical. Growing up poses psychological and logical absurdities. The quandary of a logically grounded knowledge constituted out of an illogical universe pervades both books. The questions that Alice asks are not answered by the animals in Wonderland, nor by anyone after she wakens. It is likely that her questions don't have answers, or that there are no right questions to ask. Alice's adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass remain the most prophetic of the 19th century's anti-narratives, inverted quest romances, circular mathematical treatises on the illogical logic of forgetting one's desires. They display a logic that the child must master in order to grow up. As the White Queen remarks of the Red Queen, she's in that state of mind that she wants to deny something, only she doesn't know what to deny. For the child, the future lies undeniably beyond her, in a world of even more sophisticated language skills, whereas for the adult, the future is something she must remember to return to. Carroll seems to be saying that children, in their rush to grow up, can pretend to be adults too soon, and adults can also, in a very different kind of game, forget how to be children. That is, forget the central, even nonsensical desires of childhood, which endure in language as in life. It is not surprising that children love puns and riddles, just as kings and oracles do. Carroll's books of words and pictures, puns and riddles indefinitely prolong the time of childhood nonsense. Carroll's Alice books have a moral nonetheless, like childhood. They end, and yet both books, which end with measured recollection and memory, seem to continue into the future. We're just going to have to pause there. And we're going to do some more smudging. And it's talking about the past and the future and memory and forgetting. It's very interesting that, we've read the introduction in Lewis Carroll's book in our head, but part of our healing is we need to read out loud as well as in our head, because the networks and the pathways inside of us aren't connected. And so as we read out loud, there's the constructive feedback loop of information that's happening from us going out, but then going in again. out through our mouth, making sound, going in again through our ears to make connections that aren't there and that haven't been there because of our early childhood incest, sexual abuse of our father. In this lifetime, but he was sexually abused by a priest. And so therefore there's the generational trauma. So there's the real central nervous system, paternal lineage trauma, amplified with our trauma on top of it, on top of that one, and then from him, which then creates this loop. So that's interesting. So it's interesting the stuff that's coming out. And this is talking about imagination and creation, and that is orange. That is the second chakra. That is the central energy of fertility. And if a child is grown up in a healthy manner without certain boundaries being crossed, then things can naturally develop in the way they're meant to. But sadly, in the world of trauma, where things like this happen, we grew up too soon. And so a lot of this stuff that is said about children and their happy childhood, we didn't have in a conscious memory of. There may have been moments that were there, but they were never really truly there, because even when our mum was alive, she was emotionally unsound. We were trouble apparently even in our mum's stomach. And so therefore there's never been a stable foundational ground. Now we can look at that through the victim consciousness, human form perspective lens, which is very easy to fall in the trap of because we live in a victim consciousness drama triangle society. And then our fairy tales talk about the rescuer and the perpetrator, the bully, the evil person, the heroine, and the knight, the savior, the hero, the villain. The villain would be the perpetrator, the hero would be the rescuer, and the heroine's kind of like the victim to circumstance. We have read The Hero of a Thousand Faces. And so all of this is part of our healing journey, because he also talks of language and our gifts that we're still developing to come out and bring words to because of our processing language disorder. I mean, it's all intertangled, it's all entwined. And then with our yoga, we've got a deep understanding going on that we still aren't quite yet, but we are doing much better than before at vocalizing and verbalizing, but maybe not in a way presentable to others, which is why this is still a healing documentary journey. But I mean, even in reading stuff like this, I mean, Our First Love used a pseudonym. And when we, in this introduction anyway, from the book, it goes into more depths of how he wrote his name back, Lewis Carroll, how he wrote his name backwards and then put it into Latin and then translated it back into English, which gives the name Lewis Carroll. And so there's other things. So there's Our First Love, there's siblings through marriage. There's lots of different dynamics of energetics that have created pain and trauma, that as we navigate through our dissociative identity disorder and different brain networks and different ages, all in real time, the dream state that normally happens in sleep time for us is happening in waking time. And I do hope that in future we will be able to share our story in a cohesive, coherent, linear, logical way. And maybe we've got all the bits from here that we revisit, although there's so much of it overwhelms us from a linear, logical mind of how we'd find it. But hence why we always say that we've surrendered our conscious minds, our linear, logical, left brain minds, need to know and understand, and to the powers of our subconscious and our superconscious minds, the earthly densely energies, or memory, or past that's stored in the frequencies and connective tissue of the body, which then brings in the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and the autism and the ADHD and the fibromyalgia and the POTS, blah 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 blah. And the superconscious, the future, and that's the past. The superconscious, the future that's yet to happen, which a lot of people will call their spirit guides and guardian angels, because if you go into Bruce Lipton and epigenetics, it's all about belief systems. And then how when one does get older and they get more rigid, it's kind of like a rubbery plastic material that's able to be manipulated until it's been got really old and it's been left out in the sun, and then it becomes brittle and rigid and snaps. So yeah, we're just going off on one there because I think we needed to, because it's interesting, we're sitting cross-legged. When you sit cross-legged in yoga, it's meant to be considered an easy pose. For us, it's never been an easy pose, but that's because the pelvis is involved. It involves the hip flexors, the psoas major and the psoas minor, which stores all trauma, fear and anxiety. And actually something that did keep coming up in this book is anxiety, and how they use the term anxiety from what we interpret anyway, different to how we use the term anxiety now. It's almost inverted. It's swapped its meaning round. That's what we interpreted anyway, because normally for us it used to be, if we don't understand it, explain it to us backwards. And so in part of our abstraction tosai healing, we read stuff backwards, scan stuff backwards, do a lot of things backwards. And when you open up your groin, you're releasing your emotions, but we've actually got our knees in the table, so we've got 2 bars on either side, which is why we're putting our yoga blocks, our foam cushions, the thin ones either side, so that the wooden parts of the table didn't dig into our knees. So although we've got sitting in an open groin position, which would normally have to bring in and close because it would get too much emotionally, we've created a boundary for ourselves, which is why we do a lot of bath hydrotherapy yoga, because the bath acts as a boundary which our body can't do because of our Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and the hypermobility. And so we are got a straight spine because of the way we're sitting. We've got our legs open, but they're being supported so they can't open too much. Yeah, there's just so much going on with what we do. So, okay, we've got out what we need to in our blabbing of our words. Let's continue reading. And we do hope we'll edit these at a future date, but maybe we won't, because we've still got to learn the editing. And for us, when we do this stuff, everything becomes a mess again. So we have to, and just in generally, without doing this stuff, finding the energy, finding the spoons to do everyday simple living tasks, and then do the things we want to do, like the garden and this. I mean, we don't even manage it for the everyday simple living tasks. So then when we add in the extras, everything else goes to pot a little bit. But we need to do the extras because that's kind of what brings a bit of enjoyment, even if there isn't so much enjoyment in the moment. Like the garden's always a lot because we're always in so much physical pain when we do that in the moment. And for every hour of something we do, it can take up, sometimes we need to do like 2 hours, 3 hours of rest afterwards, and yoga and breathing to recalibrate and replenish and restore the body to ease the pain. But then there's other things we do which aren't so tasking. It might only take half an hour to restore. But yeah, we're going on again a bit, but it's okay because there's no one watching apart from us. But someone might watch in the future. But we will do chapters in the future. Even if we don't edit it out, we will do chapters. So yeah. Okay. And so as we're reading this, there is lots going on behind the scenes in the back, in the sub and superconscious. So this is like our waking state pruning that is going on that would normally happen in the sleep state. But a lot of people say think before you speak or do it inside your head, but we've never been able to do that. And we understand now from the book club in Ren Makes New Music Sticks Discord, there's another girl in there, and we're very similar in lots of ways, but also not. And she says, like, lots of what you do on the immediate outside is what she does internally. And so, you know, we've always just had people judge us and criticize us and tell us not to do this or tell us to do that, when they haven't realized our struggles or to the extent of our struggles and our pain, because we've masked it so well because of the autism, because we've masked it so well because of fear, because we grew up with our abuser who subtly, whether consciously or not, we don't know, but subtly manipulated us not having our voice heard and it not being allowed and it not being accepted, because the truth of what he did would be found out, and that could be a detriment to his career and all kinds of things. But then we grow up as a child with one role model who isn't a safe role model. and isn't safe in other ways, ground us for screwing up a piece of paper, ground us for watching Dirty Dancing. When we asked him if we could, because we were 14 and it was a 15, he'd say yes, we'd watch it, he'd then watch it, he'd then ground us. And so he never had, it was different with our brother because he could relate to him because it was man to man, but it was we trigger people because we present a mirror to people which is the full spectrum of them. Like we presented a mirror to someone once which we didn't realize. She thought that it was her mum and her sister that were the bullies in their family, and there was something that triggered us. We went into our victim energies, we stood up from the position we were seated in, stood backwards, and she stood towards us. And we wouldn't have known this. There's lots of stuff we wouldn't know until the other tells us, but then the other tells us, they become aware of it, but then they don't apply the action they need to change that within themselves. So she told us that that body language was bullying body language, and then she feared meeting us again. It's interesting because we told this story the other day. She then feared, but we never ended it because that's what we do. So we obviously need to end the story. So she then was fearful of seeing us, and she was fearful of seeing us because she didn't like seeing a certain shadow aspect of herself that we brought out. And obviously that friendship then petered out because, you know, if you fear seeing someone, you don't want to see them. We don't want to go to someone that fears seeing us. And we've just lost lots of friends just by being ourselves. And then, of course, that triggers the abandonment issues and the rejection issues and the suicidal ideation. And it's no wonder we've never made any long-term lasting friendships, and we've never had an adult relationship. But it's because of our intelligence and being able to suppress so much for so long that then people didn't believe what was going on with us and what was happening for us. And a lot of them blamed the ayahuasca, whereas for us, our ayahuasca journey saved our life. But we're managing to do it all on our own. It's sad that we have to do it all on our own, but people generally don't want to do shadow work or look in the mirror and see the full aspect of themselves. And then, of course, people need word communication, whereas our gifts don't lie in word communication. But we've grown a lot in the last almost decade. We're still grieving the past. I think that's going to be a very hard journey, but hopefully the future is actually going to finally achieve our dreams and what we've been wanting to manifest, with at least buying land and building our house in some form of our capabilities and needs, of which we know what they are now. And hopefully we will meet another person that has a whole entity that is on the self-awareness journey too, so that two wholes come together to make a third whole, and then we can progress together in our individual and coming together in relationship as an interdependent relationship and healing. So fingers crossed, because that's what everything we've been doing to aim for, to achieve our dreams, because we're at an age where most people now are looking back and remembering certain things, whereas for us, we're still looking forward. But then if you watch ADHD Love, Rich and Rox, they talk about being late bloomers, and that's the autism and the ADHD again. And it is the trauma, especially when there's trauma in what's meant to be your safe zone. And when there's trauma in your safe zone, like your root chakra, and then you haven't even had your heart chakra develop properly, all the other chakras, that's everything that we're doing now, because we attempted to heal ourselves from the outside in, from the tangible reality way of doing things, from lots of different perspectives and disciplines, and they didn't work. They continued to break us. And so we're finding our own way, which does have bits from different disciplines, but we're bringing it into its own cocktail to make our own package that works for us. Here, we'll just have to keep seeing what unfolds and what happens, won't we? So we're going to hold our shungite now as we read. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was published in 1865 through The Looking Glass appeared 6 years later in 1871. The first of the books began as an oral tale told on a rowboat expedition up the Thames on a golden afternoon, most likely July the 4th, 1862. That's Independence Day, isn't it? Freedom in America. The party in the boat included Charles Ludwig Dodgson, the mathematician, logician, and photographer who had already created the storytelling pen name Lewis Carroll, his friend, the Reverend Robinson Duckworth, and the three little sisters, Alice, who was 10, Lorena Charlotte, who was 13, and Edith, who was 8. Carroll was 30 at the time and had been ordained as a deacon the year before. Hardly a recluse, he enjoyed travelling, frequented the theatre, took pleasure in giving unbirthday presents on any day of the year, wrote a large number of letters, invented mathematical puzzles, and was an avid amateur photographer who liked making up pictures, often composing his subjects in tableau-like settings that suggested make-believe stories. His sisters included Tennyson, Ruskin, the Rossettis, Millais, Queen Victoria's son, Prince Leopold, as well as his favourite subject, Victorian children, particularly young girls. He gained first-class honours in mathematics and produced a number of treatises on mathematics and symbolic logic, beginning with a syllabus of plane geometry, which appeared in 1860. He was a polymath, albeit a conservative one. He considered Tuesday his lucky day. The boat trip on that July day covered about 3 miles. The story that would become Alice, according to Carroll, was extemporised as they went along that day and over several subsequent trips. Carroll remembers how, in a desperate attempt to strike out some new line of fairy lore, he sent Alice straight down a rabbit hole to begin with, without the least idea what was to happen afterwards. On one boat trip, Carol tried to amuse the girls with a game, but was forced to go on with my interminable fairy tale of Alice's adventures. With some prompting by Alice Liddell, Carroll began penning the story he initially called Alice's Adventures Underground, for reasons that are not clear. Carroll was banned from the Liddell household before completing the book, making the Alice books very much about a child as absent muse rather than as recipient of either of the books. The book, the title now changed to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, was published on July the 4th, 1865, to commemorate the date of that first boating expedition. Despite their differences, both books chronicle the adventures of a girl named Alice, modelled on Alice Liddell, whose father was the Dean of Christchurch, Oxford, where Carroll taught. Carroll first came to Christchurch in 1850. He stayed for nearly 50 years. During that time, Dean Liddell was busy attempting to modernise the college, turning it from a kind of genteel seminary into something more like a German university, a process Carroll resisted in characteristic fashion. He produced a series of comic pamphlets in protest. However, he was made a Don after only 5 years, a feat remarkable even then. Carroll met Alice in 1856, when she was 4. From that time onward, Carroll took a number of photographs of Alice and her siblings. Both Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass begin with Alice on the verge of dreaming, but the books transpire in different seasons and evoke different moods. Alice commences on a warm spring day, while Through the Looking Glass is set in midwinter. The Looking Glass, as an analogue for the confusion of things that are knowable, was probably a relatively late addition by Carroll, added at a time when, according to Alice Liddell, the 3 sisters were themselves learning to play chess, and Carroll was entertaining all 3 with stories about chess playing, among other things. The initial appearance of the Looking Glass was prompted by Carroll's meeting with another young Alice, his cousin Alice Raikes, most likely in August 1868. In his biography of Carroll, Derek Huston recounts the following incident. The room they entered had a tall mirror standing in one corner. Carroll gave his cousin an orange and asked her which hand she held it in. When she replied the right, he asked her to stand before the glass and tell him in which hand the little girl in the mirror was holding it. The left hand, came the puzzled reply. Exactly, said Carroll. How do you explain that? If I was on the other side of the glass, Alice said, wouldn't the orange still be in my right hand? Well done, little Alice, Carol said, the best answer I've had yet. Carol completed work on the sequel quickly. A manuscript entitled Behind the Looking Glass and What Alice Saw There was posted to Macmill Ian in January 1869. It appeared with its present title, In Time for Christmas 1871, though its publication date reads 1872. The book was a wild success, selling out its initial print run of 9,000 copies almost immediately. By 1893, it had sold 60,000 copies. Taming change, V's ending boredom. I can't remember things before they happen. Page 204. Can you row? The sheep asked, handing her a pair of knitting needles as she spoke. Yes, a little, but not on land, and not with needles, Alice was beginning to say. Page 209. Alice's adventures in Wonderland began as an oral tale told by... So I don't know what's gone on there. It's kind of starting off with the same again. So we're not going to read that as well. We're not sure if it's the same or not. It is a little bit the same, but we'll kind of figure out what's different between those in a bit. Let's change our position. Oh. So let's just finish it off by the cards. So the Oracle card that was chosen at the start, number 2, I wonder what will happen next. Ready to adventure, precipice of change, pause before action. I mean, collective energies at the moment, these are what the collective energies are at the moment. And this is very much what's happening for us in our life at the moment. And not knowing what will happen next and stepping into the empty void and just trusting the mysteries and the unseen can be quite daunting. So if that is what you're doing as well, and you're struggling with it, we do ourselves to cope with it, just keep going back to breath work, stillness, not necessarily stillness as in being still, but stillness as in being in nature. We attempt to do our movement, but if we are in extreme physical pain, we don't push ourselves. So if we're in pain and our body's saying rest, then we will rest. And if we want to do certain things, that there's a childhood belief systems from your parents that come up of judgment or other people, we learn to release that. And a lot of stuff when we're releasing these unserving belief systems and negative speech, we'll speak out loud what's going on internally in our head into an audio message, and then we'll do our breath work and our sounding and our subtle shaking to release those unserving dissonant frequencies from the body, which is like what an animal does. If an animal experiences some kind of trauma, it will take itself off on its own and shake that trauma out of its body. And it will be interesting to see what happens. And we have to hold trust that we have achieved dreams like building our own van, living in a van, traveling the world. And we've started things that were harder, like rather than chasing money and doing an accountancy course to follow on from our bookkeeping, we did our yoga teacher training courses because we needed it for our body and we needed it for this of what we're going through. So everything we've studied and we did in our alternative therapies and a few other things, we didn't necessarily study in them to then qualify them and become a therapist, which is what we thought was going to happen. We studied them so that we had all the tools needed for this chaos that was going to prevail in us after having the seizures and awakening us to our DID and the autism and everything that was going on, that we couldn't be awakened to sooner because we wouldn't have been able to mentally cope with it because of our upbringing, the rigid child belief systems, and the current dynamic family pattern that goes on where our family, our father, our brother, they aren't able to communicate and revisit certain aspects of their past, which to be in relationship with us where we are presently is what we feel we need to be done. And so therefore there is no relationship or connection to be had because it's unsafe, because when we're with them, our stunted generational traumas and the personalities that hold them come up and present. At least this is what's happened in the past, and we haven't been strong enough to stop that from happening. But it's not that we're not just strong enough to that. We might be strong enough to stop that from happening now, but we wouldn't want to stop it from happening because we know it's part of the healing process and the clearing process. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Fingers crossed. So the cards, the tarot cards, are the Three of Teacups, the Three of Cups, the Three of Emotions. That is all about community. It's the three women dancing together. It's interesting actually, because this card that's out from the other reading is Taurus, and that's like the Three of Cups energy as well. And we're actually on the Taurus new moon today at 20:30, 8:30 p.m. British summertime, 7:30 UTC. It's almost 3:30 now, so that's like 5 hours and 5 minutes away, which is an awesome time to be 5 hours and 5 minutes away, because 5 is the number of change, and it's a double dose of change, 5-5, which is an adventure. And that's what we just came into here, ready for adventure, ready for change. And it's what we say in our galactic calendar journey as well. And then we've got the One of Teacups, the Ace of Cups. This came out the other day as well, we're pretty sure. We'd have to see it again to be really sure of that. But so there's lots of emotions being worked with here, and it's the new emotions. So this time the Three of Teacups came out first. So it is going to be about collaboration and connection, whether it's collaboration and connection. Cups is emotions. We could say that's the orange sacral chakra. There's three. It could be the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious within the sacral, within the orange, and how all those connections are going to connect finally because they didn't connect in the optimum healthy frequency patterning as a child because of the experiences that happened. But we've had the courage as an adult to surrender to whatever is irrelevant of outside societal, family, people, society, projections, judgments, comfortabilities, assumptions, etc., narratives, and we've been strong and trusting to ourselves, even though it's meant complete isolation, but even though that's the physical pain, because we couldn't be around other people, because it did cause us extreme physical pain, because everything for us would start manifesting in the physical. And then we end on the Seven of Spears, the Seven of Swords. And we like this one again if we just go by the patterning, because yesterday it was the central nervous system channel and then a parallel line that was free. So you had this space between the central nervous system and between then the peripheral energies going, and they were contracting in from one perspective, whereas this time the peripheral energies are doing weaving, so that you haven't got the horizontal movements and the vertical movements isolated. Here you've got the diagonals. So how would you describe that? So rather than the like east to west, you've got the southeast to the northwest and the southwest to the northeast, so that you've got, rather than your verticals and your perpendiculars of the cross, you've got the X lines going on. And one thing we describe what we've made that pattern in is yoga doing the twists. When you work on the side body and you work on the twists, which contracts all your abdominal muscles to squeeze out all the old blood to let in the new blood, like when you squeeze a sponge to get rid of the old water and get a fresh water in again. That's what's happening in your body. And so therefore, when one reads cards, it's a reflection of what goes on. For us, we tend to not do the surface narratives. We're deeper. We do the fundamental energetic patterning of the individual and the collective. And so therefore, what we're describing means that we are starting to work on those diagonal movements. And so therefore, twists ought to become easier. And as long as we do it mindfully, intuitively listening to the body, not forcing with the conscious mind, which is what actually for us, the Iyengar yoga is more of a conscious mind, masculine way of doing things rather than an intuitive flow of listening to the body to do things. And I know when we did our level 1, when we did Trikonasana, triangle pose, our pelvis would turn in the opposite direction. And we said earlier about sitting down in swastikana, I think it's called, Fostasana, I can't say it, cross-legged pose, easy pose, but it wasn't easy for us. We've always found it hard. It's because that seated base of the pelvis wasn't in optimal healthy alignment, because not only because of the sexual abuse traumas, and the sexual abuse traumas of incest from the primal safety home of the root chakra. It was also because from the physical of the internal, it was also the root chakra of the external, because we had a horse accident and twisted our sacrum in all 3 planes. Because we fell off the horse, our foot got stuck in the stirrup and we got twisted as we got dragged along. And so therefore the complexity of the external and the internal energetics of the body it's been why there's been this disconnect and not being able to think inside, or being able to think inside but not being able to think inside to then have the connections between the external inside to then communicate. So that's really fascinating. When we read our tarot in the future, it's definitely going to be on a fundamental quantum collective energetics of patterning, not surface individual narratives, because when we read like that, it's then understanding the paradoxes and the need of the polarity reality, because one has transcended the duality reality. So that's going to be really exciting how that happens, especially seeing as it was the wounded heart, the 3 of swords on the conscious, the aware scene, which we are very conscious about, and the unaware, the unseen spectrum of energy being danced in is the 10 of pentacles, the 10 of hedgehogs. So the ready to adventure, what will happen next, pause before action, dreams will be manifested. Things are going to come true because one has navigated the new Ace of Cups through. I really loved our description of the 3 of Cups. When we look at it from an internal quantum energetics, it's the cups, it's the orange chakra, the sacral chakra, and it's the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious within the sacral chakra that has been connected, because all physical manifestations of dis-ease come from the lower 3 chakras of the red, orange, and the yellow. And so we're going to leave it there. We're just going to look at the top and the keeping up immense effort and advance. That was the conscious aware seen spectrum of energies on the oracle card, which has got the time. And so that it has been how it has been feeling. But now we've done all this conscious, aware, awakened reprogramming of the subconscious that didn't align its energetic quantum patterning accurately as a child, so that the body could reach its postural alignment to get to health. Number 9, physical completion and tangible reality, the unaware spectrum of energy has been danced in. Curiouser and curiouser, discovery, inquiry, weirdness, and curiosity. We surrender to all of those energies. For us, that's the surrendering to the deepest depths of one's own authenticity and uniqueness, because when we are truly authentic and unique, the information that one pulls in, if your vessel is similar to another's vessel, it's not that we've stolen their material or they've stolen our material, because the vessels are just similar, pulling in similar frequencies through similar processing models. But when we really dive deep and become truly authentic and truly unique, no one else is the same. So you don't pull those energetics, those frequencies in the same way, and therefore you don't then project and express them out through the manifestations of our unique creations through that sacral chakra. And in the Mayan galactic calendar, each of the glyphs, the 20 sun tribe times, seals, they have a chakra, but they only have 5 of the chakras. They don't include the third eye, which is the chakra of Sundays, and they don't include the sacral chakra. And we find that those 2 chakras is really interesting, and they also work on the spiral. So this year of the Blue Rhythmic Storm on July the 26th, when the year started, was Friday, which is the crown chakra, the Dali radial plasma. Dali radial plasma, because we don't work in a down or an up. When we work in a down or an up, we're working in the systematic, logical, linear part of the left brain. But to truly understand the abstract and the creative and the unseen, we need to experience it through those energetics, which isn't linear and logical. And so to start putting these systems that aren't linear and logical and straight lines into linear and logic and straight line means we miss this whole. It's ineffable still currently for us, and it's generally a lot of it's ineffable anyway for anyone, because the more you dive into this stuff, the more there is. So the more, when we start asking the questions, we realize there's more and more questions anyway, and it's not about the answers, it's about the questions. But then if you come at it from that perspective, it's not even about the questions, because that's the linear, logical, structured way of doing it. And so it goes from crown chakra through the spiral of the root chakra, up to the third eye, down to the sacral, up to the throat, down to the solar plexus, spiraling into the heart. And one way's clockwise and one way's anti-clockwise. But yeah, the glyphs don't include the third eye and the sacral, and we feel that's the indigo violet and the orange. And the orange is the collaboration, the integration of the red and the yellow. Just like the crown chakra is, if it's purple, some people see the sixth chakra as purple, is the integration of the red and the blue, and the red and the blue is the root chakra and the throat. And if we then, that then takes us on a whole rabbit hole of not only patternology, but the reflexology, and how your whole body is manifested in your head, your whole body is manifested in your hand, and your whole body is manifested in your feet, because they are reflections. So for us, what's been coming to us is the brain, and the way the brain works and its intricacies is a reflection of the deep internal patternology of the body. And the Adam's apple is a really condensed part of the expansive sacral energetics that goes on in the intestines. But we're going to stop there. We said we're going to end, and we'll just keep on going. So thank you if you've joined us. We hope you enjoyed the book, and we will come back again and at some point. But for us, what's soon for one of us in a certain moment, and energetics tends to be quite a way. So we don't tend to do anything now, say anything like that with our words, because we want to be impeccable with our words, but we realize we can't be impeccable with our words as we're still dancing in this intuitive flow. So thank you for joining us. Enjoy Alice's adventures in Wonderland, listening to it, and your own experiences of waking state dream time. Happy Sunday. Bye. Or happy whatever day it is, wherever, whenever you are. Tootala.